All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the MARG, which is our Multidisciplinary Advocates and Researchers Group. We are here January 15th. This is the first one of 2026, and so I'm happy to see all of your faces. My name is Sharayla Haynes. I'm the Community Partners Project Manager of Community Engagement here at Frontiers, the Clinical, Translational, and Science Institute here at the University of Kansas. And we are so excited to start the year off with this great presentation. So I'm going to do a little bio, and then I'll turn the stage over to her. So Dr. Heather Henderson is the Associate Dean for Research, Compliance, and Accreditation at Wichita State University. She came to Wichita State from West Virginia University School of Public Health, where she was a faculty member in the Department of Health Policy, Management, and Leadership, the Director of Accreditation, Planning, and Evaluation. She is the former chair of the Association of Schools and Programs of Public Health, the Data Section, and has served on the ASPPH Data Advisory Committee since 2018. She was a founding member of the ASPPH Scholarship of Teaching and Learning Task Force and serves on both the Peer Review Advisory Group and Education Advisory Committee. With over 20 years of experience in accreditation and compliance, Heather Henderson has led evaluation and reporting efforts at the program, school, and university levels. We are so excited today to hear about expanding the clinical and translational science workforce through statewide training programs, a collaboration between the West Virginia CTSI and the West Virginia AHEC Scholars Program. I turn it over to you, Dr. Heather Henderson. Thank you so much.
Awesome. I'll just say right now, I used to be a previous K-12 teacher and I taught middle school. Interruptions do not bother me. And I tell you this because I am visually impaired. So if you raise your hand on here or you drop a message in the chat, I won't see it. I've already asked for a little help with catching things, but if something's really exciting and you want to interrupt, go ahead and do it. Let's see here. You should see my presentation, and I apologize for the border on it, but again, with my visual impairment, I need that border to be able to navigate. As she was saying, I have landed here in Wichita. I was recruited, and this is my first time in the Midwest, and I'm enjoying it. But I came from West Virginia University, and just to give you a little background, we had two missions that were in competition with one another. We were a land grant institution, which meant we were to serve everybody and to, in that process, take underprepared students and get them where they needed to be. And we were an R1 institution that wants the cream of the crop and the best of the best to do research. And so there was a lot of navigating some of those spaces in preparation of our students. One of the things I did that wasn't in my bio was I was also researcher. So I worked with the West Virginia Clinical and Translational Science Institute, and I was one of their program directors. The goal of their CTSI was to be a catalyst for change, and they really focused on partnerships, research partnerships for clinical and translational research that targeted West Virginia's priority areas. And I'll mention some of those when I get into the examples of where we placed students. Was that a question, or does someone just have their mic on? Okay. We had cores just like your Clinical and Translational Institute does. And since every institute's set up a little differently, I'll just briefly discuss kind of what we did with these. So the administrative core was exactly what you think it should be. They were helping to oversee the institute. But when you look at the community engagement and outreach core, the biostatistics, epidemiology, and research design core, and the clinical research resources core, each of those cores was doing their own research through the institute and also partnering with faculty outside of the institute to support them with their research projects. So there were two different levels of research going on. And I was housed in the community engagement and outreach core. The other things that you see there are similar to things that you have going on, supporting pilot projects, tracking and evaluation of things. But all of these were resources that we used for our own projects and to support other people's projects. Here you can look at our aims for cycle 3, and we had 3 big aims. Of course, to build the research infrastructure across the entire state, to get stakeholders more engaged. That's everybody's goals. Like, we have to get that going on, right? In bold, I put train and support the next generation of clinical and translational scientists, because that's what I was doing. That was the focus of this particular project. And if you look at the map, you can see that throughout the state, we had some key places, key partnerships that were helping to support this particular program. So on the Eastern Panhandle, where the Berkeley Medical Center was, that was one of our hospital systems, and they were doing clinical research. So they were partnered with us. WVU Medicine, which is in the northern part of the state, had NIOSH and West Virginia University all part of this project. And I should say that the WVU Medicine was throughout the entire state. There was no county where WVU Medicine didn't have facilities. So I'll speak to that a little bit later. The VA hospital, the major VA hospital in Clarksburg, which is kind of more central in the state, was partnered with us. The entire State Department of Health and Human Resources was partnered with us for this project. Marshall University, because they had medical programs there, was helping to lead some of this. And of course, the School of Osteopathic Medicine. So we were branched out pretty wide through the state with who was helping with this particular work. We also partnered with the West Virginia Area Health Education Centers. And in West Virginia, their goal is to improve the health of the communities by developing interprofessional workforce, and really focused on the needs of rural and underserved communities in West Virginia. One thing that you may not know that we hear constantly in West Virginia is West Virginia is the only state in the U.S. to be recognized by census as 100% Appalachian and 100% rural. So everything we did was focused on these efforts. Now, people there would disagree if they lived in the capital city or lived in the university city, but they were genuinely just mountain university towns. They were not big cities. So we were really working with AHEC with this program for a couple of reasons. One, AHEC was very established at providing educational training, and they worked with faculty throughout all the universities to provide this training. But also, they were able to provide stipends to the students that were in our program. And they're a nationally recognized program for preparing future healthcare workers in rural health. So the partnership was just a really nice fit for us to serve each other's needs. This is a map of the West Virginia Area Health Education Centers coverage. Just really briefly, the colored areas are where we had hubs. So they had hubs to serve each of those areas. And we also had a big regional office in the middle of the state and an office in Monongalia County, which is where West Virginia University is. Now, there are a few states on the east side or the west side that are in white. The reason those counties did not have coverage was because the population was so extremely rural, there wasn't a need for this education there. Those counties are served under CTSI on other projects, but this was not a good fit for what they needed in that area. So who did we invite into the clinical and translational science program that we developed? Well, our AHEC scholars allowed health sciences students from any of these programs. A lot of these you'll recognize as traditional health science programs, but I want to point out that we were smart enough, and I say smart enough because these groups are often excluded when you're doing these projects, nutrition specialist, social work specialist, and psychology and counseling specialist. You know, that we had to fight for. That's also something I want to mention. These are not programs that are always covered by AHEC scholars. And so we had to do arguments to get those programs included. But students from any university or college in the state that offered these programs could apply. So public, private, HBCU, anybody. And it's a competitive process for the students that were accepted into this program. So what is the program? What were we really teaching? So the initial project, the initial grant was written to develop a primer on clinical and translational science. And this is a year-long course, a year-long experience that students could apply to, and again, get accepted competitively. The goal was to increase healthcare providers' engagement in rural health research. And the original approach was to introduce scholars to clinical and translational science concepts, resources, and most importantly, opportunities to actually engage in the research themselves, to get hands-on experience. We had to facilitate experiential learning activities with our partner institutions that focus on translational and implementation science. So anybody in the state that was doing translational science, we were asking, can you take students? Okay. So one of the things that we developed over time with our structure was we reached out to AHEC scholars and we said, 1 year is not enough. Can we have a second year for students to continue to research experiences so they can get more deep into it? We had hybrid and online options with some travel depending on where our students were placed to do research. We worked with partners throughout the entire state. So if a student was in a certain part of the state for their program, we tried to get them a partner in that part of the state so they didn't have to travel to get to someone to work with. So our first cohort had 5 students, and this was 3 years ago now. They started in 23. And it ran for a year through summer. And that's important to know too. These students volunteered their summertime as well. So what are some examples of sites and projects that we were able to place students in? We had a cardiac program that ran through the University Extension Office in our capital city. And the students that worked on that worked on interventions that focus on physical activity and nutrition. We had a diabetes research project that our students were partnered with in WVU Eastern, which again is a hospital system. And they were working on diabetes research. And particularly, one of our students was focusing on diabetes research in African-American pregnancy. West Virginia is one of the highest death rates for African-American pregnant women. And so we really wanted to address that. Again, you can see we had another group of students that were working with the Rural Community Opioid Response Research Team in one of our rural counties that was hit heavily with opioid addiction. And then we had the West Virginia Breastfeeding Alliance through the School of Osteopathic Medicine, where we were having students work with clinical and translational science. So we had a little bit of range here for our first cohort. So what did we expect our students to be able to do when they were going through this? Well, we had a LMS that we used for CTSI. And that LMS, we built out things like they had to do their city training certification, but we built out modules like you would for any course. We built out different skill sets that we wanted them to learn, like basics about clinical and translational science, what it really is, what you do, examples of clinical and translational science, you know, history and those sorts of things. And they did some journaling. And they had to do a poster presentation at a regional conference based on the research that they were doing with their partner site. We invited them to give oral presentations at the annual West Virginia Practice-Based Research Network Summit. So they got to interact with researchers that were actually in the state doing the things that they were doing. And we, of course, gave them the experiential learning under the mentorship of clinical and translational science professionals. So they had to take 160 hours of one-on-one research in the field. That was part of their program. What were the big picture outcomes we had for our first year? Of course, exposing these students to real science experiences with practitioners. We were trying to build out more partnerships throughout the state to build this program and expand where students could go get experiences. Part of my background is curriculum development and learning sciences. I saw that we needed a second year for students to really get something meaningful out of this program. And so we worked on that second year curriculum. There were weaknesses that I saw, such as grant writing weaknesses, how to do presentations, how to do conference proceedings, what are clinical translational science research methods. So our second year really focused a lot on those areas with students working on those. Some of the feedback we got from the very first cohort from our hosts, our scholar has been assisting us with a curriculum survey tool. To answer your questions, yes, we would love to keep our scholar so she can see the survey through the process as long as she's interested. She has a background in redacted, so her input has been so valuable. If there's anything you need, please let me know. I'm here to help in any way you can. So the host sites were excited. Here's feedback from one of our students. By attending the Practice-Based Research Network retreat, I was able to learn from professionals and inform others about the state's current landscape on practice-based research, form interprofessional connections, and spark a personal interest in clinical trial research. It was an absolute pleasure to be a part of, and I hope to make it to next year's conference. This student in particular was working on the African American diabetes research and was invited to continue research outside of this program. So it was a really good relationship. And these two students, one of them is the student that did that. These are two of my students presenting at the Practice-Based Research Network. One of them was master's student, the other a doctoral student. I should say they were coming in with different skill sets. And so we had to scaffold the training that we were doing to make sure that all students were coming out at the same place in the end as much as possible. So we've restructured the didactic course shell, and that was in our LMS. I felt the program was weak the way it was designed originally. It wasn't easy to process. It wasn't good learning. It was just info dumped into a course. So I used universal design elements to make it more interactive, to make it more focused on the exact things they needed to learn. And it was a much better experience for the students after we revised the LMS system. I developed a module handbook. This sounds simple and basic, right? But we kept getting feedback. Everybody was doing something different and they were making different agreements. So I made a handbook for the scholars and their site preceptors or mentors. And we sat down together and worked through it. So there was a better understanding of expectations and it made things a lot easier. And then we developed the second year curriculum, as I said, with grant writing basics, literature reviews, and better focus on dissemination products, what they should look like. But most importantly, it gave them deeper engagement with host site projects. You know, part of the challenge we faced was, again, being a land grant institution, many of the students were bright, but missing pockets of skills. And we didn't want them to leave without those pockets if we really wanted them to be researchers. So what advantages did we have that made this program successful? And it's still running. We're in our third year. We're doing 10 students a year. And so it's really good. as far as growth has gone. Well, one of the advantages was that all the colleges and universities within the state have full access to CTSI resources. So it was very easy to bring people in. The next advantage was that all the colleges and universities in the state that offer health science and graduate programs are eligible to apply to the AHEC Scholars programs. So we didn't have to exclude anybody. The CTSI there is actively engaged in their actual clinical and translational science research, as well as community engagement and outreach research. So we were able to provide mentoring and support to new and seasoned researchers that may or may not have worked with us before. So we were able to mentor the researchers as well as the students, is what I want to get across there. I already mentioned that the hospital system there is statewide. So when we're talking about getting access to data, that makes it really easy if everybody's working with the same data and everybody's dumping data into the same system. And I know that's different than here, but we all work with what we've got. The other thing that we had really good relationships with local nonprofits throughout the state and the university extension services, as well as other state agencies, like I mentioned, human services. So we had people we could go to constantly if we needed to shift a student's experience. I'll give you an example. We had a student who, in her first year with us, her mother died and she had to go out of state to deal with that. Great student. We didn't want to lose her. So we moved her to a placement where somebody was willing to work with her remotely to do research. And so we were able to do that because we already had partnerships in place. We were very lucky to have our own mobile clinical trial unit through the Institute, so we could partner with them and send students out to do research in those spaces. And the other big strength was university faculty throughout the state were part of the grants and part of the CTSI. So that's how I came in. As a faculty member, I was put on a grant as the director and was able to step in. They bought out my time and I could do this work for them. And it was just an advantage because we knew a lot of the students already and we could build those partnerships to keep them maintained in the program. We weren't strangers to them. So I know I went through that quickly. It's time for questions. If you have any, I will stop sharing. But that is one of the projects I led with the community engagement and outreach. This was not only an intervention basically to get students to be able to learn how to do these things, but it was also part of a research grant. So we were collecting data on it and reporting on it and publishing on it as well. So.
Heather, thank you so much for that. I have like 5 different questions down here, and I don't want to monopolize the questions, but I will start. With the mentorship program that you created, how were the researchers chosen? Were they voluntold? Was there a pool that you chose from of people that said, oh, I'm willing to do this? Or how did that actual process happen? And I'm curious because I think we probably want to do something similar in our pathway program, but don't know what's the best way to
it's layered, right? Nothing's ever simple. Nothing's ever clear cut, but there was never, ever, ever a voluntold. Because when you tell people, we've all been there, when you do that, their heart's not in it. And this is something that requires a lot of extra work that you don't really get credit for. I mean, you can put it on your promotion and tenure, like, yay, I worked with a student, but that usually doesn't amount to as much as the work that you're putting into it. And when you're talking about working with clinical researchers, especially if they're actively taking patients, they have no time. So you've got to get people whose heart is in it. So some of our clinicians were people that were on our board, that were very passionate about the work they do, that wanted to make a change in the state and would do anything to get there. and who also valued a student that was really working, willing to work their butt off, for a lack of a way to put it. If a student was putting in the effort, they were excited. We also tapped into our community partners, our nonprofits, who were just eager to be part of the discussion of everything we did. So some of them came for our community advisory board initially. But a lot of them were also partnered on other projects that we were doing throughout. And so they were already engaged in research with us in another way. And they were like, oh, yeah, we would love to have a student if they're capable of doing. So on the back end of that, there was a lot of looking at the students, what their strengths and weaknesses were that they were bringing to the table, and fitting them with the right placements. Not sending someone to a placement they really wanted but didn't have the skill for. And so creating some of those partnerships. And honestly, a couple times we had to tell a partner, we are so glad you want to work with us. We don't have a good student for you, and we don't want to send you someone that's not. And they appreciated that and said they would take a student the next year. So being open was very valuable. But once people see that this is working for people, like after our first cohort, and when we did our summit presentations and we did our, presentations through CTSI, people started going, oh, this is working. Because they were hearing it from other researchers they respected, and they're like, we're willing to take a student. So, it was exciting to see it grow, I guess is what I want to say. Because they don't know what to expect until somebody tells them what's really happening. Does that help?
It absolutely helps. And then I know I said I wasn't going to monopolize. Just one more question about that same thing. In the middle of your presentation, you said that some of the researchers even were being mentored just from their relationship with the students. Did you provide any training for the investigators? I assume most of the people that are passionate about this work are already very much familiar with community engaged research, the PBP, community-based participatory research. They had already done that, but some of the nonprofits, I don't know if they felt competent to be able to take on a student with this whole arrangement. I'm just curious about
So
that
the
too.
nonprofits we had were already engaged in other research, which made it good. But when I talk about mentoring, I will just be open here. Lots of researchers, lots of clinical scientists are great at what they do. I'll say this for all faculty. All faculty are great at their content area. Some are great at teaching. Most have never been taught how to teach or how to teach in certain settings. So they mimic what they were taught or what was done with them. And that's not always best practice. So one of the things we mentored was not only giving them better structure for how to set up communication with your student, but also, here are some things that work. Here are some things you should try when you're working with your student, to help them learn when they're stuck on this or stuck on that. So part of what we did was whole group. We would have all the mentors and all the students come together for a big overview. But then we did individual meetings with students and mentors for the initial meeting to make sure they were really on the same page as to what they were expecting out of the experience. And then we checked in with students regularly, and we checked in with mentors regularly separately. And anytime there was a problem, we jumped in and we're like, let's all meet, and acted like it was normal and not like it was a challenge. So we were very, very hands-on, and we could catch things before they became a real issue. The worst thing that could happen is a student wants to be involved. They have poor communication with their mentor and nothing happens. And then at the end of the experience, they go, well, nobody communicated with me. And I'm like, so I've seen that on other projects. So I was like, this isn't going to happen. So regular awareness of what's going on.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I have a question. This
Yes.
is Dalton. I work in educational access and equity. You said that some students were missing pockets of skills. Can you expand on like what you most commonly saw and how you reacted to that?
Oh, goodness. I certainly can. So again, with learning sciences as one of my backgrounds, I'm always fascinated at the points we miss opportunity to really give those skills that people need that we're not even acknowledging. And I'll say the same for our peers. I see it a lot with grad students. I see the same thing with brand new faculty out in the world. Somebody assumed at some point they learned how to write a bio sketch or how to write aims or how to gather information for a grant. And guess what? Many of them never did. Um, I mean, I know you see that. I see writing overall as a huge weakness, and there are many reasons for that. The way we teach in K-12 is very different than it used to be. There's not as much experience with lengthy writing. So when they get to college, some of them genuinely don't know how to use grammar and spell check. And I don't say that to be funny. They've just never had to practice. They haven't had to practice formatting. So there's a lot of basics in that will pop up. Um, I see understanding why you're writing. So what should I put in an intro to a research paper? What should I be asking? There's a lot of disconnect between what is the question and what is the analysis I should be doing. Not surprisingly, lots of weakness in statistical analyses, lots of weakness in methodology. So I tried to pick some basics to start with so that if they saw something else, they would at least recognize whether it looked decent or not. And so some of the mentoring is walking them through processes. How do you write with a partner? How do you, big things, who gets credit for a manuscript? Talk about something that even our peers don't always get. Students need to understand different disciplines do authors order differently, and just, I mean, a lot of random little basics, right, that you may learn on the job, but if you don't have them before you enter academia or enter research, you're at a disadvantage. And so those sorts of things are just off the top of my head. I mean, there are lots, but those are ones that I see frequently.
This
Thank you
is
so
Frank
much.
Thompson with University